Hi there, and welcome to the Dietary Restriction Kitchen. I'm Nat Ryan. Today in the kitchen, I'm going to show you a recipe that is in keeping with our theme for October of everything pumpkins. And yet this recipe is not a sweet recipe. It's kind of a savory one, and it's for creamy pumpkin soup. And it is dairy-free and very delicious and very warming for this time of the year in the fall. So let's get started on that. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is start out with a big pot. Like this is a Dutch oven style pot because it's going to make quite a bit of soup. So we're going to start with that. And then, of course, because it's pumpkin soup, we're going to start with pumpkin. Now, it's quite a bit of pumpkin, and it's pumpkin puree. So it's pumpkin puree like that. Whoop. I always have a hard time with that. Like that. So pure pumpkin, not a pumpkin pie filling, but a pumpkin puree. If you were making your own pumpkin puree, like from pumpkins you have, then you could use that too, although they will be a little bit more watery. Okay, so in that case, sometimes it could be a little bit more liquidy, your own homemade pumpkin puree. If that's the case, you can always reduce the amount of broth that you use in the soup as well. So this is a full, like 3 cups of pumpkin puree that I'm putting in here. Okay, so in that, and then the next thing we're going to do is add an equal portion of, so 3 cups of broth. Now, I'm using a chicken broth today, and it's a homemade chicken broth. You can use a homemade broth, you can use a store-bought broth, you can use chicken broth, you could use a vegetable broth as well if you want. So if you're vegetarian, you could still make this, you just don't make it with chicken broth, you make it with vegetable broth. If you people that you're having over for dinner or a meal are vegetarian, this would be a great recipe to make as well, because you can make it vegetarian by using vegetable broth instead of a chicken broth. But I like to use chicken broth, so I'm going to pour that right into that with it. Okay, so that's my homemade chicken broth this time. Sometimes I use store-bought broth, sometimes I use my homemade. Depends on, it just depends. Depends if I have some made. Now I'm going to use a whisk to blend that together. Okay, so you can see that it's already, it's a nice, it's going to be a nice thick creamy sort of soup here. So you could use a hand blender too. If you got one of those emulsion blenders, you could use that as well to blend that up together. The next thing we're going to do is put in our spices and flavoring. So we got some salt and some garam masala Indian spice blend in here. So we're going to pop that in there. Whoops. And in here we have ground ginger, ground coriander, and some turmeric, and some white pepper. So that goes in there too. So I'm sticking at the bottom there. Okay. And I'm going to mix that up together. So I don't even have this on the stove yet, but you could do this on the stove at the same time, but I'm going to show it mixed, because you can mix this up this fast, this quickly. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is add the ingredient that makes it creamy. So what makes this creamy is adding some coconut milk. So a can of coconut milk. But before I add it to the soup, I want to show you something, because sometimes when you pop a can of this open, oh, that looks pretty done. But sometimes you open it, you see it's liquidy in the bottom. That one actually was quite well mixed, but most of the time they're not that well mixed. So I'm just going to get a spoon and get the rest of it out of the can and off of the lid here. So yeah, it's in. Ooh, that went right there. And then just scrape off any off of the lid of the can. It's very messy. And then I like to take, well, a whisk. You could use a hand blender as well, and then I just like to whisk it together or blend it together to make it all come together. This one wasn't too bad. Sometimes it is so separated that it's like a solid mass at the top of the can, like the first about that much inch and a half, 2 inches is just solid, and then in the bottom it's all the liquid. Sometimes they're that separated. So I really, when I open a can of coconut milk, I like to put it in a bowl, mix it together, and then I can use it. Okay, so once we got that coconut milk all mixed up together, we're going to use the entire can and pour it right into the soup. Again, you could do this on the stove top itself. I'm going to be loud for a second. Just getting this off out of the bowl, at least most of it. Set that aside. And then we're going to either blend it with a hand blender or a little bit emulsion blender, or we can just use a whisk. And we're going to mix that all up together. And I've done it off the heat. But like I say, you could do it on the stove top. And you can see that now is a nice, beautiful, creamy looking color. Does not need to be blended in a blender or food processor. And we're just going to pop that on the heat and heat it up and serve it out. So I'm just heated up the soup on the stove, and I'm just going to serve some out. And oh, this ladle's not my favorite one in the house, but there we go. And how I like to do is just serve that out with a piece of that. And there you go. I mean, how good does that look? Oop. There you have it. Lovely soup. Easy to do. Easy to make. Great with to start a fancy dinner if you have people over. It's also a great soup to have with salad or with a sandwich at lunchtime. Or just a piece of brown bread loaf like I'm having today. And I hope you enjoy it. And thanks so much for coming to the Dietary Restriction Kitchen today. Bye for now.